The conference hall fell silent, absolutely silent. Dean Robert Harrington stood frozen at the podium, his face draining of all color as he stared at the projection screen behind him. The same equation he'd mocked 15 years earlier, the one he'd called mathematically illiterate, and an embarrassment to academia, was now displayed in front of 1,200 of the world's leading mathematicians, and beneath it in bold letters, Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences. The young man he'd dismissed from his office with barely concealed contempt. He was sitting in the front row, wearing a gold medal. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because this story of ultimate vindication, begins on a cold Tuesday morning in October 1998, in a cramped dorm room at Cambridge University, where a 21-year-old graduate student named Marcus Williams was about to discover something that would change the world. He just didn't know that the hardest part wouldn't be proving his theory. It would be getting anyone to listen. Marcus Williams woke up at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before his alarm. He always woke up early. Not from anxiety exactly, but from that persistent hum in his brain that never quite shut off. The equations, the patterns, the numbers that danced behind his eyelids even in sleep. His roommate, Dev, was still snoring softly in the other twin bed, buried under a mountain of blankets against the October chill that seeped through their drafty window. Marcus sat up carefully, his feet finding the worn rug beside his bed. 21 years old, first-generation college student. The first person in his family to even finish high school, let alone earn a full scholarship to one of the world's most prestigious universities for graduate mathematics. His mother worked 3 jobs back in South London, cleaning offices before dawn, serving lunch at a cafe, stocking shelves at Tesco until midnight. She'd cried when he got the acceptance letter. Actually cried, something Marcus had only seen her do twice before, once when his father left and once at his grandmother's funeral. "My brilliant boy," she'd whispered, holding the letter like it was made of gold. "My brilliant, brilliant boy." Marcus pulled on his thickest sweater, navy blue, with a hole forming at the left elbow that he kept meaning to sew, and his wire-rimmed glasses. He caught his reflection in the small mirror above his desk. Dark skin, close-cropped hair, eyes that looked perpetually tired from too many late nights with textbooks and coffee. Not particularly tall, not particularly imposing. The kind of person people's eyes slid past in a crowded room. He liked it that way mostly. Being invisible meant being underestimated, and being underestimated meant people left you alone to work. On his desk sat 17 notebooks, all filled with his cramped handwriting. Proofs. Theorems, failed attempts, and successful breakthroughs. And in the latest notebook, the one with the green cover that he'd started just 6 weeks ago, there was something different. Something that made his hands shake slightly when he looked at it. He'd been working on a problem in game theory, specifically, how to predict market behavior when traditional economic models failed. Nash equilibrium, the foundation of modern economics, assumed rational actors. But Marcus had noticed something. People weren't rational, not really. They were predictably irrational in ways that could be mathematically modeled if you approached it differently. What if, Marcus had wondered at 2 a.m. 3 weeks ago, what if you could create a mathematical framework that accounted for systematic irrationality? Not as a bug in the system, but as a feature. He'd started writing. The equations had poured out of him like water from a broken dam. Probability theory merged with behavioral psychology, merged with advanced calculus in ways he'd never seen before. It was elegant. It was beautiful. It felt true in a way that mathematics rarely did, that bone-deep certainty that he'd found something real. His advisor, Professor Sarah Chen, had been encouraging. "This is sophisticated work, Marcus," she'd told him last week, peering over her reading glasses at his preliminary notes. "Really sophisticated. You should present it to the departmental seminar." But there was a protocol. Before presenting to the department, graduate students needed approval from the Dean of Mathematics. Dean Robert Harrington. Marcus had never met him personally, but everyone knew of him. Brilliant by all accounts. Cambridge-educated, Oxford Ph.D., published extensively in his youth before moving into administration. Old school, traditional. A man who believed mathematics had rules, and those rules existed for a reason. Marcus glanced at his watch. 6:03 a.m. His appointment with Dean Harrington was at 9:30. 3.5 hours to review his work one more time, to make sure every proof was airtight, every assumption justified. He made instant coffee in the mug his mother had sent him, white ceramic with "World's Best Son" in fading blue letters, and opened the green notebook. He had no idea that in 3.5 hours his life was about to change forever. Pause, just not in the way he hoped. Cambridge University in autumn was a study in contrasts. The ancient stone buildings, some dating back to the 13th century, stood alongside modern glass structures housing cutting-edge research facilities. Students in worn jeans and hoodies walked past professors in traditional academic robes. The air smelled of old books, fresh coffee, and ambition. The mathematics department occupied the Center for Mathematical Sciences, a complex of connected pavilions that looked like abstract sculptures dropped onto the Cambridge landscape. Inside, the walls were covered with chalkboards still bearing equations from yesterday's lectures, some erased in haste. Others preserved like religious texts, because no one dared touch the work of a visiting Fields medalist. Marcus loved this building, loved the quiet intensity of it, the way people here spoke in the language of numbers and proofs. Loved that a kid from South London could walk these same halls as Newton once had, could stand at the same intellectual altar. But he was also acutely aware of how few people who looked like him walked these halls. In his cohort of 37 graduate mathematics students, Marcus was one of 2 black students. The other, Jennifer Okonkwo, was studying algebraic topology and had quickly become his closest friend in the program. They'd bonded over shared experiences, the microaggressions, the surprised looks when they answered questions correctly. The well-meaning professors who seemed shocked by their eloquence. "Just keep your head down and do the work," Jennifer had advised him over coffee last month. "That's all we can do, let the mathematics speak for itself," sound advice. Marcus had always believed in it. At 9:15 a.m., Marcus stood outside Dean Harrington's office on the 3rd floor of the Pavilion B building. The hallway was quiet, almost reverent. Oil paintings of former department heads lined the walls, stern-faced white men in academic regalia, their eyes seeming to follow him as he waited. The door was heavy oak with a brass nameplate, Dean Robert Harrington, Ph.D., FRS****. Marcus clutched his green notebook against his chest. Inside were photocopies of his work, 63 pages of proofs, equations, and theoretical framework that he'd spent the last 6 weeks of his life developing. He'd triple-checked everything. Professor Chen had checked it. A fellow graduate student who specialized in game theory had checked it. It was solid. He knew it was solid. The door opened. A thin woman with steel-gray hair and sharp features peered out at him. Dean Harrington's secretary, Mrs. Pemberton. "Mr. Williams?" Her voice was clipped efficient. "Yes, ma'am. The dean will see you now." Marcus took a breath and walked inside. Dean Robert Harrington's office was exactly what Marcus expected. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A massive mahogany desk that looked like it weighed more than Marcus's entire dorm room furniture combined. Diplomas and awards covered one wall: Oxford, Cambridge, Royal Society Fellowship, various honorary degrees from institutions around the world. Behind the desk sat Dean Harrington himself. 63 years old, with silver hair combed meticulously back from a high forehead, piercing blue eyes behind titanium-framed glasses, and the kind of posture that suggested a lifetime of being listened to. He wore a 3-piece suit, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored with a Cambridge blue tie. He didn't stand when Marcus entered, didn't smile, barely looked up from the document he was reading. "Mr. Williams," it wasn't a greeting, just an acknowledgement of identity. "Yes, sir." "Thank you for meeting with me." "Sit." Marcus sat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk, perching on the edge, the green notebook on his lap. His palms were sweating slightly. He wiped them on his jeans, hoping it wasn't noticeable. Dean Harrington finally looked up, his eyes sweeping over Marcus with the kind of assessment that felt clinical, detached. Like a jeweler examining a stone of questionable quality. "Professor Chen tells me you've developed some theoretical work you'd like to present to the departmental seminar." The pause before "theoretical work" was barely perceptible, but Marcus caught it, the faintest hint of skepticism. "Yes, sir." It's an extension of game theory that incorporates systematic behavioral biases into economic modeling. I believe it could. Let me see it. Marcus opened his notebook with trembling fingers, pulling out the carefully prepared packet of his work. He'd bound it with a black clip, organized it with a table of contents, included an abstract at the beginning for easy reference. He slid it across the vast desk. Dean Harrington picked it up, holding it between his thumb and forefinger like it might be contaminated. He flipped to the first page. His eyes moved across the abstract for perhaps 30 seconds. Then something changed in his expression. It was subtle, a slight tightening around his mouth, a barely perceptible lift of his eyebrows, not interest, something else. Something that made Marcus's stomach clench. Behavioral game theory? Harrington's voice was flat. Yes, sir. Integrating prospect theory and hyperbolic discounting into Nash equilibrium models to create a more predictive framework for. I'm familiar with the concepts, Mr. Williams. The interruption was sharp. I'm also familiar with why they're fundamentally incompatible with rigorous mathematical analysis. Marcus felt his face grow hot. Sir, if you look at equation 7 on page 12, I've demonstrated how. Harrington flipped through the pages, not reading, just scanning. Marcus could see his eyes weren't actually processing the work, just skimming, dismissing. Mr. Williams. Harrington set the packet down and removed his glasses, cleaning them with a cloth from his desk drawer. How long have you been in the graduate program? 14 months, sir. 14 months. He replaced his glasses, looking directly at Marcus for the first time with full attention. And in those 14 months, you believe you've solved a fundamental problem that has occupied the greatest economic minds for decades. I'm not claiming to have solved everything, sir. Just that I've found a mathematical framework that. Do you know how many graduate students I see each year who believe they've revolutionized their field? Harrington leaned back in his chair. Fingers steepled. Dozens genuinely bright students who get overly ambitious, who mistake complexity for innovation. Sir, Professor Chen reviewed this work. She thought Professor Chen is an excellent teacher, Harrington interrupted. She's also very encouraging of her students, perhaps sometimes overly so. The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus's heart was pounding now. Dean Harrington, if you would just look at the proofs in section 3, I think you'd see. Mr. Williams. Harrington's voice hardened. I've been in this field for 40 years. I've published extensively on game theory. I've reviewed hundreds of papers. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that what you've presented here is. He paused, picking up the packet again, weighing it in his hand like he was calculating its worth. It's undergraduate-level work at best. Marcus felt like he'd been slapped. It shows ambition, I'll grant you that, but ambition without rigor is just. Well, Harrington smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of someone who just won an argument that the other person didn't know they were having. It's not mathematics. It's creative writing. Sir, I respectfully disagree. If you would. The departmental seminar is for serious scholarship, Mr. Williams, for work that advances the field. Not for, he gestured vaguely at the packet. Not for this. Marcus sat frozen, his mouth dry. Around him, the office seemed to press in all those books, all those diplomas, all that accumulated authority bearing down on his 63 pages of work. I would suggest, Harrington continued, his tone softening into something that might have been mistaken for kindness if you didn't listen carefully, that you focus your energies on more traditional research. Build your foundation before you try to redesign the house, as it were. There's no shame in following established paths, especially for someone of your background. There it was. Delivered so smoothly that Marcus almost missed it. Someone of your background. Sir, we're done here, Mr. Williams. Harrington slid the packet back across the desk, not gently. I have another appointment in 5 minutes. Marcus stood slowly, picking up his work with hands that had gone numb. The green notebook suddenly felt incredibly heavy. Dean Harrington, I know this work is sound. I've checked it. Professor Chen has checked it. I'm asking you to please just read. I said we're done. Harrington's voice was ice. If you want to pursue this theory of yours, you're free to do so on your own time, but I will not waste the department's resources on mathematical fantasy. Do I make myself clear? Crystal clear. Marcus walked to the door, his vision blurring slightly. Behind him, he heard Harrington chuckle, a soft, dismissive sound. Behavioral game theory, the dean muttered to himself, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. Next, they'll be submitting horoscopes. The door closed behind Marcus with a heavy click. In the hallway, the painted eyes of dead mathematicians stared down at him. Marcus leaned against the wall, clutching his notebook, trying to breathe normally. 14 months of work. 6 weeks of breakthrough insights. 63 pages of proofs, dismissed in less than 10 minutes. He didn't know it yet, but that dismissal would haunt Robert Harrington for the rest of his life. What happened next would change everything. Marcus walked back to his dorm room in a daze. The October sun was bright. Students laughed and chatted on the lawn. Someone was playing guitar near the fountain. Normal life, continuing around him like he wasn't falling apart inside. Dev was in class when Marcus got back. Good. He needed to be alone. He sat on his bed, the green notebook on his lap, and opened it to the first page. The equations stared back at him, as elegant and true as they'd been this morning. Had he missed something? Made an error so fundamental that Harrington had spotted it in 30 seconds. He went through every proof, line by line, checking, rechecking, nothing. The mathematics was sound, which meant that Harrington was wrong, that seemed impossible. The man had 40 years of experience, publications in the most prestigious journals, a fellowship in the Royal Society. Or maybe, whispered a small voice in Marcus's head, it meant exactly what it looked like. That Harrington hadn't actually read the work, that he dismissed it based on something else. Someone of your background, Marcus's phone buzzed, a text from his mother. How did it go, baby? I'm praying for you. He stared at the message for a long moment, then turned his phone face down on the bed. He couldn't answer her yet. Couldn't tell her that her brilliant boy had just been called mathematically illiterate by one of the most respected minds in the field. That evening, Marcus met Jennifer at the Graduate Student Cafe, a cramped space in the basement of the mathematics building that smelled perpetually of burnt coffee and dry erase markers. That bad? Jennifer asked, taking one look at his face. Worse. Marcus told her everything. The dismissal, the condescension, the horoscope's comment. Jennifer's jaw tightened. Did you file a complaint? A complaint about what? That he didn't like my work. That's his job, to evaluate research proposals. Marcus. Jennifer leaned forward, her voice low and intense. He didn't evaluate it, he dismissed it without reading it. That's different. Can you prove that? Silence. Exactly, Marcus said quietly. It's his word against mine. Distinguished dean versus first-year graduate student. Who do you think they'll believe? So what are you going to do? Marcus looked down at his coffee. It had gone cold, a thin film forming on the surface. I don't know. What he didn't tell Jennifer, what he couldn't articulate yet, was how deeply the rejection had shaken him. Not just his confidence in his work, but his confidence in his place here. In this ancient university, these hallowed halls, among all these brilliant minds who'd been preparing for this their whole lives while he'd been trying to help his mother pay rent. Maybe Harrington was right, maybe he was out of his depth, but over the next few weeks something else started happening. Professor Chen, when Marcus told her about the meeting, went very quiet. Very still. He said what? Her voice was carefully controlled. Marcus repeated Harrington's assessment, undergraduate-level work, creative writing, not serious scholarship. That's, Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. That's not an accurate evaluation of your work, Marcus, not remotely. Maybe I should revise it. Start over with something more traditional. No, Chen's response was sharp enough that Marcus looked up in surprise. No, you absolutely should not. This work is significant, Marcus. Genuinely significant. I've sent it to a colleague at MIT, Professor Ellen Richardson. She's one of the leading experts in behavioral economics. She wants to see more. Marcus felt something flutter in his chest, hope maybe, or just the remnants of it. She does. She's impressed, very impressed. In fact, Chen pulled out her phone, scrolling through emails. She's invited you to present at a workshop she's organizing next month. Small group, mostly postdocs and junior faculty, but it's a chance to get real feedback from people who understand this work. It wasn't the departmental seminar. It wasn't Cambridge validation. But it was something. I'd like that, Marcus said quietly. Good, because Marcus, Chen looked at him over her reading glasses. Don't let one person's opinion, no matter how senior, define your worth as a mathematician. The work speaks for itself. Eventually, it always does. Eventually. Such a fragile word, carrying so much weight. Marcus threw himself into preparation for the MIT workshop. He expanded his framework, ran additional simulations, strengthened his proofs. He barely slept, living on coffee and adrenaline and the stubborn refusal to believe that Harrington's dismissal was the final word. Jennifer helped him practice his presentation, sitting through run-through after run-through, asking questions, pushing him to clarify his arguments. "You're going to kill this," she told him the night before he left for Boston, "or fall flat on my face. Those aren't mutually exclusive. But you're still going to kill it." The MIT workshop was held in a small seminar room that smelled of whiteboard markers and ambition. 15 people, graduate students, postdocs, 2 associate professors, and Professor Richardson herself. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes, and a reputation for intellectual rigor that bordered on ruthlessness. Marcus presented for 45 minutes. His hands shook for the first 5, then steadied as he lost himself in the mathematics. The equations filled the whiteboard, one after another, building his framework like he was constructing a cathedral. When he finished, there was silence. Then Professor Richardson spoke. "That," she said slowly, "is one of the most innovative approaches to behavioral economics I've seen in a decade." The room erupted in questions, not dismissive questions, real ones, engaged ones. People wanted to understand his framework, to explore its implications, to push it further. For 2 hours, Marcus stood at that whiteboard, fielding questions, defending his proofs, refining his arguments. It was exhilarating, exhausting. Everything he'd hoped his meeting with Dean Harrington would be. Afterward, Professor Richardson pulled him aside. "Have you submitted this anywhere?" "No, ma'am. I was hoping to present it at my departmental seminar first, but..." Marcus hesitated. "There were some concerns about its rigor." Richardson's eyebrows rose. "From whom?" "Dean Harrington." "At Cambridge." Something flickered across Richardson's face. Recognition, maybe, or something less charitable. "Robert Harrington." She said the name like she was tasting something bitter. "Yes, well, Robert has always been traditional in his thinking. Brilliant in his day, but not particularly open to paradigm shifts." "So you don't think the work is undergraduate level?" Richardson actually laughed. "Undergraduate level. Marcus, this is publishable right now. I'd like to submit it to the Journal of Economic Theory with your permission." Marcus felt dizzy. You would. I don't waste my time on undergraduate-level work. This is sophisticated, original, and frankly, it's going to make a lot of people very uncomfortable because it challenges some fundamental assumptions in the field." She smiled. "Those are my favorite kinds of papers." Marcus flew back to Cambridge on a cloud, publishable, in one of the field's top journals. Professor Richardson thought his work was significant. He couldn't wait to tell Jennifer, even his mother. Couldn't wait to prove that Harrington had been wrong. But when he got back to campus, there was an email waiting in his inbox. "From R. Harrington Maths, Cam AC UK Subject, Research Ethics Review Mr. Williams, it has come to my attention that you have been presenting preliminary research outside the university without departmental approval. As per university guidelines, all graduate student research must be reviewed and approved before external presentation. I'll need you to submit your work for formal ethics review before any further dissemination. This process typically takes 8-12 weeks. Additionally, I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss appropriate protocols for graduate student research. Regards, Dean Robert Harrington." Marcus read the email 3 times. 8 to 12 weeks. For an ethics review of theoretical mathematical work that had no human subjects, no experimental component, nothing that would typically require ethics approval. He wasn't stupid. He knew what this was. This was Harrington making sure that Marcus's work stayed buried. The next 6 months were a special kind of hell. Professor Richardson submitted Marcus's paper to the Journal of Economic Theory in December. The reviews came back in February. 2 enthusiastic recommendations to publish, 1 request for minor revisions. But the revisions required access to university computing resources to run additional simulations. And to get that access, Marcus needed departmental approval, which meant going through Dean Harrington. "This is absurd," Jennifer said when Marcus explained the situation. They were in the library, surrounded by stacks of textbooks, both of them looking increasingly haggard as term wore on. "He's blocking you deliberately." "I can't prove that." Of course you can't prove it. That's how academic gatekeeping works. Everything is framed as proper procedure and appropriate oversight. Marcus rubbed his eyes, exhausted. He'd been sleeping poorly, stressed dreams about equations that didn't work and doors that wouldn't open. His mother had noticed on their last phone call, her voice worried. "You sound tired, baby." "Are you eating enough, sleeping?" He'd lied, told her everything was fine, great even. The work was going well. He couldn't tell her that the dean of his program seemed personally invested in ensuring his failure. The ethics review, when it finally came back in late March, was a masterpiece of bureaucratic obstruction. Harrington had raised concerns about Marcus's methodology, concerns so vague and technical that they essentially required him to redo months of work with additional validation. Professor Chen tried to intervene. "Robert, this is ridiculous. The work is sound." "Ellen Richardson at MIT has vouched for it, for heaven's sake." Harrington's response was smooth as silk. "Sarah, I appreciate Ellen's expertise, but we have our own standards here. Mr. Williams is our asterisk student, and it's our responsibility to ensure the work meets Cambridge's rigorous criteria." "This isn't about rigor, Robert. This is about, are you suggesting I have some ulterior motive?" Harrington's voice could have frozen nitrogen, because that would be a very serious accusation. Chen backed down, she had to. She was untenured, relatively junior, and making enemies of powerful deans was a career-limiting move. Marcus understood. He didn't blame her, but it meant he was on his own. In April, things got worse. Marcus's scholarship came up for renewal, a standard process, usually rubber-stamped for students in good standing. But Harrington, as dean, had discretionary authority to recommend adjustments based on research productivity. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. "Due to concerns about research progress and adherence to departmental protocols, your funding for next academic year will be reduced by 30%. 30%. Marcus did the math immediately. His scholarship barely covered his expenses as it was. A 30% reduction meant he'd need to find work, which meant less time for research. Which meant falling further behind, which meant he saw the trap, saw how elegantly it was constructed. Harrington hadn't expelled him, hadn't failed him, hadn't done anything that could be challenged. Just made it gradually more difficult to succeed until Marcus had no choice but to leave. That night, Marcus called his mother. "I might need to take a year off," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "The funding situation is complicated." Silence on the other end. "Then how much do you need, baby?" "Mum, no, you're already—" "How much?" "I can't let you—" "Marcus," her voice was steel. "Your father left us with nothing. I worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over your head and get you through school. I didn't do all that so you could quit when things got hard." "How much?" Marcus told her. Heard her sharp intake of breath. Knew she was calculating, figuring out which shifts to pick up, which bills to delay. "Mum, please, I can get a part-time job, I can." "You focus on your studies." "I'll handle this." "This isn't right, I shouldn't have to." "Baby." Her voice softened. "Life isn't right, life isn't fair, but you're brilliant, you hear me? You're asterisk brilliant asterisk. And you're going to prove it to everyone who ever doubted you." Marcus hung up and cried for the first time since starting graduate school. Pause, big silent tears that he wiped away quickly in case Dev came back. In May, Marcus got a job washing dishes at a restaurant near campus. 4 nights a week, 6 p.m. to midnight, £8.50 an hour. The work was mindless, which was both good and bad. Good because he could think about mathematics while scrubbing pots. Bad because it left him with too much time to think about how far he'd fallen from where he'd hoped to be. His fellow graduate students noticed his absence from evening study sessions. "Where have you been?" one asked. "Working." Marcus didn't elaborate. Jennifer knew, though. She showed up at the restaurant one night, sat at the counter, ordered tea she didn't drink, and waited until his shift ended to walk him home. "This is bullshit," she said quietly. "It is what it is." "No, Marcus, this is deliberate, systematic obstruction by someone who should be supporting you. This is exactly the kind of thing that drives brilliant people out of academia. Maybe I'm not as brilliant as everyone thought." Jennifer stopped walking, grabbed his arm. Don't you dare internalize his bullshit. Your work is revolutionary, you know it, I know it. Professor Richardson knows it. Half of MIT knows it. The only person who doesn't seem to know it is the one man whose opinion shouldn't matter. His opinion is the only one that does matter, Marcus said tiredly. He controls my funding. My access to resources, my ability to present my work, he controls everything. For now. What's that supposed to mean? Jennifer smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone plotting. It means keep your head down, keep working, keep refining that paper, because eventually, the truth comes out. And when it does, Robert Harrington is going to regret every single thing he did to you. Marcus wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe that merit mattered, that good work spoke for itself, that justice prevailed. But he was 22 years old, washing dishes to pay for a graduate education that was supposed to be funded, working on research that was supposedly worthless, and trying to prove his worth to a man who decided he had none. Belief was getting harder. Summer came. Most students left Cambridge for internships or research positions elsewhere. Marcus stayed, working double shifts at the restaurant, refining his paper in the early morning hours before the heat became unbearable in his unair-conditioned dorm room. Professor Richardson kept in touch via email, encouraging him, pushing him to submit the revised version of the paper. "The field is moving," she wrote in July. "Other researchers are starting to explore behavioral approaches. You need to get this published before someone else stumbles onto the same framework." The thought made Marcus's stomach clench. To have worked this hard, overcome this much, only to be scooped by someone else. He submitted the revised paper in August, and then he waited. Academic publishing moves slowly in the best of times. Journal reviews can take months, even years. But for Marcus, every day of waiting felt like a year. Every morning he checked his email, hoping for news, finding nothing. In September, when the new academic year started, there was a departmental meeting. All faculty and graduate students were required to attend. Dean Harrington stood at the front of the lecture hall, discussing the year's priorities, new initiatives, research expectations. Marcus sat in the back, trying to be invisible. "We have high standards here," Harrington was saying, his voice carrying easily across the room. "Cambridge mathematics is synonymous with excellence. And that means we cannot afford to let our standards slip, to chase fashionable trends, or to mistake novelty for rigor." Several people nodded. Marcus felt sick. "I know some of you are eager to make your mark," Harrington continued, his eyes seeming to sweep over Marcus for just a fraction of a second. "But remember, mathematics is built on a foundation of centuries of careful work. Innovation must be grounded in that tradition, not in opposition to it." After the meeting, several faculty members approached Harrington, shaking his hand, agreeing enthusiastically. Marcus watched from across the room, feeling invisible and simultaneously exposed. Professor Chen found him afterward. "Ignore him," she said quietly. "Just ignore him and keep working. I am working, I'm just not getting anywhere. Yet." "You're not getting anywhere yet." In October, exactly 1 year after Marcus's disastrous meeting with Harrington, an email arrived from the Journal of Economic Theory. Marcus's hands shook as he opened it. "Dear Mr. Williams, we are pleased to inform you that your paper, A Mathematical Framework for Modeling Systematic Irrationality in Economic Decision-Making, has been accepted for publication, pending minor final revisions." He read it 3 times, 4 times, accepted. Not just accepted, the reviews were glowing. "Groundbreaking, paradigm-shifting, likely to become a foundational text in the field." Marcus sat at his desk, staring at the screen, feeling something crack open inside his chest. Not quite joy, not yet, but something close to vindication. He forwarded the email to Professor Richardson. Her response came within minutes. "Congratulations, I told you, I told you." "This is just the beginning, Marcus, just the beginning." He wanted to forward it to Dean Harrington. Wanted to print it out, walk into his office, and slide it across that massive mahogany desk with the same dismissive gesture Harrington had used a year ago. But he didn't. Because he'd learned something in the past 12 months, the best revenge wasn't confrontation. It was success. Still, he couldn't help imagining the look on Harrington's face when he found out. The paper was published in the Journal of Economic Theory in January 2000. And then, nothing happened, not immediately anyway. A few colleagues congratulated him. Professor Chen bought him coffee. Jennifer insisted on taking him out to celebrate, a real celebration, at a restaurant where he wasn't washing dishes. but Cambridge remained largely indifferent. Harrington made no acknowledgement of the publication. Marcus's funding wasn't restored. His access to resources didn't improve. It was like the publication existed in a parallel universe that didn't quite touch the one he was living in. "It takes time," Richardson assured him when he expressed frustration. "Academic recognition is glacially slow, but trust me, people are reading it. People are talking about it." Marcus had to trust her. What else could he do? He started his second year of graduate work, still washing dishes, still financially strapped, still operating under the shadow of Harrington's disapproval. But something had shifted inside him. He'd proven at least to himself that his work was valuable. That would have to be enough. For now. In March, Marcus received an email from a graduate student at the London School of Economics. "I read your paper in JET," the email said. "It's incredible. We're using it in our behavioral economics seminar. Would you be willing to give a guest lecture?" Then another, from Berkeley. From Yale, from researchers who'd found his work, been inspired by it, wanted to build on it. The paper was spreading. Slowly, quietly, but spreading. In April, Professor Richardson sent him a link to a citation tracker. His paper had been cited 17 times already, an impressive number for such a recent publication. By June, it was 34 citations. By September, 61. "This is unusual," Richardson told him during a phone call. "Papers don't normally accumulate citations this quickly unless they're really hitting a nerve in the field." Marcus was still washing dishes, still struggling to make rent, still invisible at Cambridge. But somewhere out there in universities and research centers around the world, people were reading his work, using it, building on it. Harrington had called it undergraduate level, creative writing, mathematical fantasy. The field was calling it foundational, and Dean Robert Harrington had no idea what was coming. The invitation arrived in November 2004. Marcus was 27 now, 3 years out from his PhD, working as a postdoctoral researcher at Oxford. He'd left Cambridge immediately after defending his dissertation, a dissertation that expanded on his original framework, and that had been examined by external reviewers specifically because Harrington had recused himself, citing previous disagreements about methodology. Professor Chen had apologized for that. Marcus had just smiled tiredly. By that point, Harrington's opinion had ceased to matter, or so he told himself. The invitation was from the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. Official letterhead, formal language marked confidential. Marcus opened it standing in his tiny Oxford office, still wearing his coat because the heating was broken again. "Dear Dr. Williams, we are writing to inform you that your work on behavioral economic theory has been selected." His eyes skipped ahead, not quite believing what he was reading. "For the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences." The letter continued, explaining the formal announcement process, the December ceremony in Stockholm, the protocol, the expectations. Marcus sat down heavily in his desk chair. Nobel Prize, his paper, the one Harrington had dismissed as undergraduate-level work, was being awarded the Nobel Prize. He read the letter again and again, waiting for it to change, to reveal itself as a joke or a mistake. It didn't change. The Nobel Prize Committee had selected his framework as representing a fundamental advancement in our understanding of economic decision-making and human behavior. They wanted him in Stockholm in 5 weeks for the ceremony. Marcus called Professor Richardson first. She screamed so loudly he had to hold the phone away from his ear. "I knew it, Marcus, I knew it." "Oh my God, do you know what this means?" He called Jennifer next. She cried. He called his mother last. She cried too, but differently, deep, shaking sobs of relief and pride and vindication. "My brilliant boy," she whispered. "My brilliant, brilliant boy. Mum, I couldn't have done it without you. Those extra shifts you worked, the money you sent. Hush, you did this. Your brain, your work, your refusal to give up even when they tried to break you. This is your victory, baby." After he hung up, Marcus sat in his dark office for a long time, the letter on his desk, reality slowly sinking in. Nobel Prize. And Dean Robert Harrington would be at the ceremony. Marcus had checked the attendance list. Cambridge would be sending a delegation, led by the Dean of Mathematics. The man who dismissed his life's work as mathematical fantasy would watch him accept the Nobel Prize. Marcus smiled in the darkness. Sometimes, justice took the long road. But it got there eventually. Stockholm in December was brutally cold but impossibly beautiful. Marcus arrived 3 days before the ceremony, jet-lagged and overwhelmed by the grandeur of it all. The Nobel Prize organizers had arranged everything. A suite at the Grand Hotel, a formal suit tailored specifically for him, a schedule packed with interviews, receptions, and meetings with other laureates. There were 5 other recipients that year: a physicist, a chemist, 2 doctors sharing the medicine prize, and a writer receiving the literature award. Marcus was the youngest by 2 decades. The only black recipient. The only one whose acceptance speech he'd been revising obsessively for 3 weeks, unable to get it right. What do you say when you've been vindicated? When you've proven wrong everyone who doubted you. The ceremony was held in the Stockholm Concert Hall, a building that looked like a blue temple dedicated to human achievement. Marcus had been shown pictures, but they didn't capture the reality. The soaring architecture, the banks of flowers, the 1,000 people in formal attire filling every seat. The Cambridge delegation sat in the section reserved for academic institutions. Marcus spotted them during the rehearsal the day before. Dean Harrington was there, silver hair now pure white, still wearing his 3-piece suits, still projecting that aura of unquestionable authority. Their eyes met across the concert hall. Harrington's face went carefully blank. He nodded once, a minimal acknowledgement, then looked away. Marcus felt nothing, no anger, no satisfaction. Just a kind of distant curiosity about what Harrington was thinking in that moment. Did he remember? Did he remember calling Marcus's work undergraduate level? Did he remember the dismissal, the funding cuts, the systematic obstruction? Or had Marcus been so insignificant in Harrington's world that the whole thing had been forgotten? The ceremony itself was a blur. Marcus sat on the stage with the other laureates, wearing his formal tailcoat, acutely aware of how surreal this all was. 5 years ago, he'd been washing dishes to pay for graduate school. Now he was about to receive the most prestigious prize in his field from the King of Sweden. The physics prize was announced first. Then chemistry, then medicine, then economics. The presenter, a distinguished professor from Uppsala University, stood at the podium. The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences has decided to award the Sveriges Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel to Dr. Marcus Williams. Pause. The words that followed were a blur. Something about revolutionary framework and paradigm shift and fundamentally altering our understanding of human decision-making. Marcus walked to the podium on legs that didn't quite feel like his own. The King of Sweden handed him the medal, heavy, gold, impossibly real, and shook his hand. Congratulations, Dr. Williams. Your work is extraordinary. Thank you, Your Majesty. Then it was time for his acceptance speech. Marcus stepped to the microphone, looking out at the sea of faces. Somewhere in that crowd was his mother, who'd used her savings to fly to Stockholm. Somewhere was Professor Chen, who'd believed in him when it cost her political capital. Somewhere was Jennifer, who'd walked him home from dishwashing shifts and told him to keep fighting. And somewhere in the Cambridge section sat Dean Robert Harrington. Marcus began to speak. Your Majesty's distinguished laureates, ladies and gentlemen. His voice was steady, stronger than he'd expected. 5 years ago, I was a graduate student working on a theory about how people make decisions. I knew that I had found something important. Something that could help us understand why people act the way they do, why markets behave irrationally, why traditional models fail to predict human behavior. He paused, looking directly at the Cambridge section. Not everyone agreed with my assessment. A ripple of polite laughter. I was told my work was undergraduate level, creative writing, not mathematics. I was told to focus on more traditional research, to follow established paths rather than forge new ones. The laughter had stopped. People were leaning forward now, sensing something beneath the surface of his words. And I nearly believed them. Nearly convinced myself that a first-generation student from South London had no business thinking he could revolutionize a field. Nearly quit. Marcus's throat tightened. He took a breath. But I had people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. A mother who worked 3 jobs to support my education. A professor who risked her career to support my research. Friends who walked me home from dishwashing shifts and told me to keep fighting. He saw his mother in the audience, tears streaming down her face. This prize isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who was told they didn't belong. Everyone whose work was dismissed because it challenged orthodoxy. Everyone who was underestimated because of where they came from or what they looked like. He held up the medal. This prize says you do belong, your ideas do matter, your perspective, your unique perspective is not a weakness, it's your strength. The applause started then, building like a wave. But Marcus wasn't finished. To the young people out there who are working on something they believe in, something that others dismiss or ridicule, keep going, document everything. Build your foundation, and trust that eventually, maybe not today, maybe not this year, but eventually, the work speaks for itself. He looked directly at Harrington. Truth has a way of emerging. Justice has a way of arriving. Sometimes it takes longer than we want. Sometimes the road is harder than it should be. But it gets there, and when it does, the people who doubted you will have to watch you accept the gold medal. The applause was deafening now. People were standing. His mother was openly sobbing. Professor Chen was wiping her eyes. And Dean Robert Harrington sat completely still in his seat, his face the color of old parchment, staring at Marcus like he was seeing a ghost. The reception after the ceremony was held in the Stockholm City Hall, a massive building with halls covered in gold mosaics and chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls of light. Marcus moved through it in a daze, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, posing for photographs with the other laureates. The medal hung heavy around his neck, a physical weight that somehow felt lighter than all the years of doubt he'd been carrying. His mother found him near the champagne fountain, pulled him into a hug that threatened to crack his ribs. "I'm so proud of you, so proud I can barely breathe. I love you, Mum. I know, baby." "I know." Professor Chen was next, then Jennifer, then a stream of colleagues and supporters, and people he'd never met who'd been influenced by his work. But through it all, Marcus kept looking for one person. He found Harrington near the exit, standing alone, studying one of the gold mosaics on the wall with intense concentration that was obviously forced. Marcus walked over slowly. Harrington must have sensed his approach because his shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn around. "Dean Harrington!" Now he turned. Up close, Harrington looked older than Marcus remembered. The lines around his eyes had deepened. His hands, clasped behind his back, were trembling slightly. "Dr. Williams," the title came out strained. "Congratulations." "Thank you." Silence stretched between them. Around them, the reception continued, laughter, music, celebration. But in their small bubble, everything was very still. "I suppose," Harrington said finally, "an apology would be inadequate." "Yes," Marcus said simply, "it would be." Harrington flinched. "I was wrong about your work, about your potential." About, he trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. "About whether someone like me belonged in mathematics. I never said. You didn't have to say it." Marcus kept his voice level, factual. "You just had to dismiss my work without reading it. Cut my funding, obstruct my research. Someone of my background, that's what you said. You remember that?" Harrington's face was gray. "I remember." "Good." Marcus adjusted the medal around his neck. "Because I need you to understand something, Dean Harrington. This," he gestured at the Grand Hall, the celebration, the Nobel Prize itself. "This isn't spite. This isn't revenge. This is just what happens when you can't keep talented people down." He started to walk away, then paused, turned back. "I had to wash dishes to stay in your program." "Did you know that?" Harrington said nothing. 4 nights a week, £8.50 an hour, while my mother worked extra shifts to send me money, while other students were in study groups and attending seminars. And I still published the paper. I still did the work, because you know what I learned? Marcus stepped closer. "I learned that gatekeepers like you're not obstacles, you're just speed bumps. Annoying, yes. Frustrating, absolutely, but not obstacles, not for people who actually have something to say." He turned to leave, then heard Harrington's voice, barely above a whisper. "I've followed your career. Since the publication, I've read everything you've written." Marcus looked back. Harrington seemed to have aged a decade in the last 5 minutes. "And," Marcus asked, "and you were right. About all of it, the framework, the mathematics, the implications. It's brilliant work, Dr. Williams, genuinely brilliant." Harrington met his eyes for the first time. "I failed you. As an educator, as a mentor, as a human being. I let my assumptions and prejudices blind me to your talent, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. It didn't change what had happened, didn't give back the sleepless nights, the financial struggles, the doubt and pain and fear, but it was something. I appreciate you saying that, Marcus said finally. I do, but Dean Harrington, the person you really failed, wasn't me. It was all the other talented students you probably did the same thing to. The ones who didn't have a Professor Chen, who didn't have the stubbornness to keep fighting, who just gave up and left. Harrington closed his eyes. That's what you should regret, Marcus continued quietly. Not that you were wrong about me, I proved you wrong and I'm fine. Regret the ones who believed you when you told them they weren't good enough. The ones who never got to this stage because you broke them first. He walked away then, back toward the light and warmth of the celebration, leaving Harrington standing alone in the shadows of his own making. The rest of the evening was a blur of joy. Marcus danced with his mother to a swing band, laughed with Jennifer and Professor Chen, exchanged ideas with fellow laureates about the future of behavioral economics. At one point, he found himself on a balcony overlooking Stockholm's glittering harbor, the Nobel medal heavy in his pocket, trying to absorb the reality of his situation. A young woman approached, one of the graduate students helping coordinate the event. Indian, maybe 23, nervous energy radiating from her. Dr. Williams. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I had to tell you, your work changed my life. How so? I was going to quit my PhD program last year. I'm studying computational neuroscience, and my advisor kept telling me my approach was too theoretical, not practical enough, basically that I was wasting everyone's time. She was speaking quickly, words tumbling over each other. Then I read your Nobel lecture, the part about people who doubted you, about how the work speaks for itself eventually. Her eyes were shining. I decided to stay to finish my dissertation, to prove my advisor wrong the same way you proved Dean Harrington wrong. And last month, my paper was accepted to Nature Neuroscience **. My advisor had to write me a recommendation letter acknowledging that my impractical work was groundbreaking. Marcus felt his throat tight. That's incredible. No, Dr. Williams. What you did is incredible. You didn't just revolutionize economics. You showed people like me that we belong here, that our ideas matter. That being underestimated just means they'll never see us coming. She shook his hand and disappeared back into the reception, leaving Marcus alone on the balcony with the city lights reflected in his eyes and the weight of responsibility settling over his shoulders alongside the gold medal. Later that night, back in his hotel suite, Marcus sat by the window watching snow fall over Stockholm. The medal was on the desk beside him, catching the lamplight impossibly real. He thought about Harrington, about the apology, the regret, the admission of failure. It would have meant everything 5 years ago, 4 years ago, even 2 years ago. Now it was just noise. Because Marcus had learned something crucial in those years of struggle. Other people's opinions of you only matter if you let them. Harrington's dismissal had hurt deeply, but it hadn't stopped him. The work continued. The truth emerged, justice arrived, and that was the thing about truth. It didn't need anyone's permission to be true. Mathematics didn't care about Harrington's prejudices or Marcus's background or who belonged in which spaces. The equations worked or they didn't. The proofs held or they fell apart. Marcus's had held. More than that, they'd changed the field. Students were now studying behavioral economics at universities around the world using frameworks built on his work. Economic policies were being shaped by his insights. Future Nobel laureates would cite his papers in their research. The kid from South London who wasn't supposed to belong had created the foundation that others would build on for decades to come. There was justice in that, poetic justice, but Marcus also thought about what he'd said to Harrington, about the other students, the ones who'd been broken, the ones who'd believed the gatekeepers and given up. That was the real tragedy, not Marcus's struggle. He'd made it through, scarred but successful. The tragedy was all the brilliant minds lost to academic prejudice, to systematic exclusion, to the small daily cuts of being told you don't belong until you start to believe it. How many potential Nobel laureates were out there washing dishes right now, convinced their ideas weren't good enough? How many revolutionary theories died because someone with authority decided they weren't worth hearing? Marcus couldn't save them all. couldn't reach back through time and prevent every act of academic gatekeeping. But he could do one thing: he could be visible, could tell his story, could show every underestimated kid that the gatekeepers were wrong, could prove, again and again, that belonging isn't something others grant you. It's something you claim for yourself through your work, your persistence, your refusal to accept other people's limitations. The snow continued to fall. Stockholm slept. And Marcus Williams, Nobel laureate, sat watching the city and thinking about the future. Not his future. That was secure now, bright with possibilities. The future of all the students who would come after him. The ones who would face their own Dean Harringtons, their own moments of crushing dismissal, their own dark nights of self-doubt. He would be the proof they needed. The evidence that you could start from nothing, be told you were nothing, and still become everything. That mathematics, that truth itself, belonged to anyone brave enough to seek it. That genius didn't have prerequisites. Didn't require the right background, or the right connections, or the right color skin. Just required the courage to keep going when everyone told you to stop. If you're watching this, if this story means something to you, if it reminds you that your ideas matter, that your perspective has value, that being underestimated is not the same as being wrong, then I hope you'll subscribe to hear more stories like this. Because the world is full of Marcus Williamses, people doing extraordinary work in ordinary circumstances, people being dismissed by those who should support them, people proving that dignity and brilliance aren't granted by institutions, they're inherent qualities that no amount of prejudice can diminish. These are the stories that need to be told. The ones that remind us that justice, however delayed, has a way of arriving when we least expect it. And sometimes, just sometimes, the people who laughed at you end up watching you accept the gold medal. But this story of academic vindication, it's just the beginning. Because what happened when a single mother working at a grocery store walked into a prestigious law firm with nothing but a handwritten contract and a brilliant mind? Well, that's a story that'll make this one look gentle. Until next time.